Hey guys, it's Mathel here once again with the starter build Gladiator Puncture character kind of up and running at this point. It is level 87 as of the end of yesterday's stream, and I'd say quite safely it does feel like quite a nicer starter than the Explosive Arrow. It gets going off of just much less links, gear, passives, and feels quite smoother to play because all you really need to do is hit something once and it'll pretty much bleed down to death by the end of its duration, and it's very satisfying to play with the bleed explosions and watching the damage over time work in action. And at this point there are plenty of options for your clear skill. You can use Split Arrow, you can GMP onto Puncture, you can use Rain of Arrows, though I'm yet to test Rain of Arrows and I'll probably have an update on that one by next time, but supposedly it's pretty good, and all of those are very viable options, but Rain of Arrows doesn't have any inherent added physical damage scaling, so it will require slightly better gear overall. You'll need a real bow most likely, and as such the only real thing holding this type of character back right now is the fact that corroded fossils, which is how you would craft your weapons for bleed poison builds, are quite steep in the pricing category because, well, poison and bleed builds are fairly popular right now. It doesn't take many fossils to get what you need though, because they're very basic items, but yeah, it is just a little costly to try and get the right type of weapon going. And mine's pretty decent. It's fairly basic, but about as good as it'll ever need to be, and it does make the game feel very smooth with the amount of extra bleed you'll get for your punctures. And the playstyle, as you can see, is run around, right click with your split arrow, and then single target with your puncture. And you can see that we've got totems enabled as well. That's with ensnaring arrow. So now with ensnaring arrow, it has made your bleed quite a bit more potent and easier to apply before you get Crimson Dance. So without Crimson Dance, you do rely on the enemies are moving or enemies are still moving sort of mechanic for bleed to enhance your damage quite a lot, and ensnaring arrow makes it so things are always moving technically, and that even works for things like betrayal, fortification, doors, which doesn't make any sense. But there it is. So if you get an ensnaring arrow on any of that, you can easily see your bleed damage just quadruple, and it's pretty silly. Overall though, it isn't going to be the end game. I'm pretty sure we're still going to Crimson Dance at the very end of the character for real proper bosses where you do have time to reapply your bleeds over and over up until the point where you get 8 stacks, and at that point it should be more profitable to use Crimson Dance. But while you're leveling, while you're just playing the game through lower tier, mid tier maps, there's absolutely no need for Crimson Dance, and it's a lot simpler now with Ensnaring Arrow to gain huge amounts of damage as opposed to just waiting for things to move. So I wouldn't recommend getting Crimson Dance early on because it's completely unnecessary, as the playstyle is just one tap and move on, and for that Crimson Dance is no good. But Puncture's been very successful here so far, and just a smooth character. It's what I thought it would be when I played my Gladiator last league as a Lacerate build, and I just thought it feels like it could be a bow character, because being very melee, being very stationary, didn't seem that good compared to the exact same setup, but as ranged and just having to one-tap things with your puncture at full-blown ranged, and it's what I thought it would be. But I think the damage potential is a bit less than the Lacerate overall, but it should make up for the fact that you're ranged, and also my Lacerate character last league I felt had more damage than he ever needed for anything that was currently available. That said, everything got buffed, and there are tougher bosses, and you can see in this next boss, I think it's a tier 12, this guy, he is fairly tanky, but I'm still missing a few little upgrades, no 6 link, and overall I think my damage should be about 1.5 million bleed DPS while moving, that is, so if Ensnaring Arrow is working, and most of the time you see it is. And one little thing about that, you can't use Pierce on any of your character if you want your ensnaring arrow to work. So that's why we're not using something like drill neck. And drill neck just isn't that good for this type of character in the end. But the idea is that it's a very mobile playstyle, it should be kind of a tanky character, and there's not a very strict requirement with the gear. The gear that took me to like tier 10 maps was 4-link bow with 300 DPS and like 20C worth of investment. So overall, it's a great starter, I think, much better than the explosive arrow, which just did not hold up to the hype, at least not in my opinion, at least not the way I built it as well. So let me get into how the character is currently built and what sort of little future upgrades I plan to make, but it is essentially what I described in the starter build video with a few little tweaks. So here is our current character, level 87, about to hit 88, and he's played at this point 20 hours, which isn't too bad off of a basic Atlas that I've done a lot of recurring grind on, called Magnus Opus of builds. Joke there being, I watched shit movie, Evangelion, I don't know, fucking whatever, weeb movie, and some review had Magnus Opus instead of Magnum Opus, and whatever, you get the idea. Terrible joke, shit weeb movie, do not recommend. And it's a Gladiator that is spec'd around primarily gratuitous violence. That's the idea behind Gladiator for the most part. You want the more damage with bleeding and the bleed explosions, which feel oh so good for a build like this. And then on top of that, you do get Arena Challenger, which makes you run around quite a bit faster, and a bit of other utility with blood in the eyes, and then just a little bit of extra damage from our Outmatch and Outlast while you're mapping, and hopefully once we can sustain frenzies on bosses as well. Though there are certainly arguments to be made for the Scion version that people have brought up, with Gladiator Ascendancy there, and then pick something else, maybe Berserker, maybe Pathfinder, Raider, something like that. So you can definitely look into a Scion version of the build as well, but you'll have to use Hemophilia gloves if you want the explosions the way we have in this build, and they are a really large part of it for clearing certain things and also feeling good. And the passive tree, I think so far for the character is the same as the starter build video. The only difference I can see is I took phase acro because, well, there is quite a lot of damage out there in this league at the moment, and I didn't take the 2 points to go to life and mana leech. I've simply fixed my mana leech through gear, and then we have a little bit of life leech from blood rage anyway. But besides that, I think the setup is basically the same, running malevolence, flesh and stone, which lets us maim things nearby or take less damage from things in Sandstance, and as well as that, let us swap between our Challenger charge generation and then just a War Banner for increased physical damage for nearby enemies. But aside from that, we have our just basic corroded fossil bow. So the really important thing here is the 60% chance for this weapon to deal 100% more damage. That is essentially a 100% more damage multiplier. Since you're only really trying to get one bleed on the enemy, hit that 60% chance and boom, 100% more. And it's from the corroded fossil. So to craft this, we use corroded fossil and jagged fossil, and then ideally you're looking for the 2 extra fizz rolls. Craft whichever one you don't have, maybe you'll get both, but you can settle for some very basic ones that will do just enough for you, because there's a lot of inherent scaling from Puncture. Here you can see it goes 68 to 102 added fizz. You get some added fizz on your gear as well, and all in all your bow doesn't become that important for its damage. It's mostly important for the bleed mod and just some other things elsewhere. So we did start with a hunter bow here, which is Hunter Influence, the new type of influence, because there are a few little mods we can get that might make it good. I didn't happen to get those, but that's totally fine. And once again, there's Hunter Gloves here with physical damage over time. That's the mod we're looking for. And we crafted this with jagged fossils. Slam a few jagged fossils onto Hunter Gloves and you should find that you get some fizz damage over time somewhere. Likewise with a quiver. I didn't actually craft this one, I just bought it, but it has physical damage over time, which is a hunter mod. There is also a damage over time mod on quivers now, so crafting with jagged fossils can actually lead to some pretty cool results there. And other than that, it's all pretty much just standard gear. This is an Elder amulet that has physical damage over time, which is pretty important too, just to min-max all of our damage. And then life resists vulnerability, and that is a delve ring, so you can get these from certain delve physical nodes. Bought this thing for a few chaos, though you can craft your own in the form of warlord, I believe it is, rings. So we've got vulnerability on hit here. I tried to craft and managed to get better than this one, but I can't use the cold resist, so throwing it away. And flammability on hit on this one, so grab yourself one of these if you want to craft your own and make some vulnerability on hit, or grab a real basic bitch one from the delve nodes and buy it on trade for a few chaos. They go for, yeah, absolutely nothing, and it's very basic. Otherwise, resists life, bit of chaos res, since chaos does kind of matter now, and then jagged fossil crafting our helm as well for the 9 fizz damage taken. So that's the base setup, as well as that as Rislatha's Coil, because it gives us more max fizz damage and less min. So you hit weaker on the min end, but you hit a lot harder on the top end. And with the bleed playstyle, that means you just need to shoot a few more times to get the biggest bleed possible, and you can see that it just increases our range quite substantially. So hopefully when you high roll, you'll hit a really huge bleed. So the actual setup we're running with for Puncture on single target is Puncture, Deadly Ailments, Vicious Proj, Brutality, and then Unbound Ailments. Our last link, I think, is Chance to Bleed at this point. And on the Split Arrow, we're running Split Arrow, Pierce, Deadly Ailments, Chance to Bleed, Brutality. And up until then, I was 4-linking for like literally 85 levels, I think, and Split Arrow clears like a beast either way. And for Puncture, I was 4-linking up until like level 80 without Unbound Ailments. So it works really nicely off of just pure 4-links, but it gets a lot stronger off of a 6th link. Another 50% extra or more damage for both 6 links on this. So it does pay to get 6 links, but it's totally fine without them. And then our ensnaring totem setup is ensnaring arrow, greater multiple projectile, ballista totem, and maim. Like I said, make sure you don't have any pierce in your current character. So if you're using a drill neck with pierce, that means your ensnaring arrow will pierce through the main target and not actually land and ensnare him. So you don't want to do that, and that is going to be a pretty big cut to your damage if you accidentally have some of that somewhere. And then we've got Flesh and Stone, Blink Arrow, Blood Rage, Dash, War Banner, Malevolence, Precision, and Summon Stone Golem. I'm currently not using Precision because my accuracy is fine, but use Precision wherever you need to fill out your accuracy if you actually still need it. Aside from that, jewels are looking like life, damage over time, physical damage, damage over time, multi, life, physical, and damage over time, life, bleed. You can also get some attack speed on bow just for quality of life, but it won't increase your damage. And that's about it for the character. Nothing too, weird or interesting. Grab whatever flasks you want. Currently, this is my setup. You definitely want some immunities and all that. But it's a pretty flexible character, not a lot of gear required. And like I said, the type of bow that I was using to begin with was it's like a 1-alch bow at this point. You're just looking for a thicket bow with a bit of physical damage. The Takatai mod, that's a temple mod. You can search for those quite easily, just fizz, chaos, and then that generates you a lot of results for crappy bows that you can craft a fizz onto, an extra fizz, because there's prefix spare on these types of bows. And then you've got like a 300 DPS bow that will carry you up until tier 10 maps, but it does pay off to get the corroded fossils onto harder hitting bows in the end game. For now though guys, that's the wrap up for the character. For the starter build, Gladiator, Puncture, Split Arrow, Dude, and I will have more in the end game, I hope. Going to try and take on some more of the end game bosses with this guy. Seems pretty good, and I'm having a blast playing it. So hope you guys are enjoying your league start. If you need another smooth little league start, can recommend this one, but Cobra Lash is my other league start that I've heard many good things about, and why wouldn't I? It's a really fun, good build. So thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.